Howsoever monistic physics may choose to be, the realm of essence is the home of eternal and irreducible plurality. The terms possible and impossible have, then, no proper application in the realm of essence. Even to facts in nature, they are applicable only in view of human ignorance or imagination. Their true field is that of discourse, where the intent to consider one connotation of the word imaginary is also ambiguous. Actual images being generated in the living psyche may be very apposite fulfillments to her previous experience or to her instinctive needs, and therefore very beautiful. And actual dreams, even if for the most part silly and fatiguing, are sometimes pleasant and even prophetic. Nothing of the sort can be said of the imaginary as a whole, conceived as the realm of essence, not being selected or produced by any living soul, but inert, infinite, and latent. It contains an appalling multitude of vain and ugly themes, as well as the few which are relevant to human interests and fit for human contemplation. If free imagination presents stray essences to the mind, attentive perception presents others, to which studious people give greater importance. The flux of nature could not be a flux, nor at all perceptible, unless it was a flux through essences, that is, through forms of being differing from one another. It is as the forms things wear to the senses or to the practiced intellect that essences are first noticed. In this capacity, or as definitions of current terms, they appear in the Socratic school. Geometrical figures fixed by intent are certainly essences. So too are any types of animal bodies or human institutions which may be arrested in thought. But so also are all the qualities of sensation despised by Platonism, and all the types of change or relation neglected by that philosophy. This neglect was ominous, because if essences had been studied for their own sake, they would have been found everywhere, as they are by the poet or the mathematician. To discern them only in natural or moral units, and to think of them as perfections towards which things aspire, is not merely to omit noticing them elsewhere, but to regard them as natural magnets, as a background of metaphysical powers more selective than nature itself, and constituting a world of substances behind the flux of appearance. Physics and theology may appeal to such patron substances if they think fit, but in the theory of essence they have no place whatever. Essences are not substances containing a matter that can assume a different essence. They cannot be the material source of anything, nor have they any relevance to particular places and times, so that one might be conceived to preside over one part of nature and another over another. The essence of a bridge cannot build bridges or breed them, and when a bridge falls and the matter of it becomes a heap of stones, the essence of that bridge is not a surviving ghost haunting the spot and seeking to restore the structure. A material bridge builder must return to the work, and the resulting form will hardly repeat exactly the one that has disappeared, nor will that discarded essence fight against reform, or in any way complain or revenge itself. If presently bridge builders come no more to the spot, and the placid stream flows on unspanned, reflecting no shadow of any human contrivance, so it is also in spite of superstition with the essences of living beings, which reproduce themselves for generations with little change of type. Their conservation is physical and an elaborate instance of rhythm and habit in matter. Here, too, a material seed must transmit the substance that is to run through the ancestral cycle and embody that familiar essence. Let the seed fail, or circumstances modify it, and at once that prescribed form is forsaken and forgotten. relegated to the realm of essence and reduced to the same impotence, or left in the same peace as all its sister essences that time has never brought to existence. The most stubborn misunderstanding of essence arises, however, from thinking and calling it an abstraction. In a popular sense, the epithet is natural and harmless. It means only that essence is immaterial. So mathematics is called an abstract science and music an abstract art. They do not describe particular parts of the material world or particular historical events. They may therefore seem unreal and superfluous to the man in the street, but the mathematician or the musician will hardly call them abstract, since his apprehension of them is direct and his interest in them primary. No doubt the material world, especially in his own person and life, supplies a suggestion and an organ for these intuitions, but their object is so far from being drawn out of existing things that it never exists in them in its ideal perfection, and the study of it requires a special imaginative faculty, a profound application, and a great exactitude. It is the very complexity and precise definition of this realm, its essential concreteness, that renders it difficult and vague to the gross mind, and it is called abstract not because it is drawn from existence, but because it is not found there. It is an accident to essence to be manifested, but not to be manifested is also an accident. It means simply that matter or intellect happen never to have traversed that form. A different plasticity in existence might make any essence an appearance, and evidently in a given appearance there can be nothing abstract, nothing verbal, unrealizable, or cognitively secondary. Each appearance, and therefore every essence, since it might well appear, is an obvious and complete being, and if essences when simple are indefinable, that fact only proves that they are the original elements of any description. Far from being creatures of language, they suffer from not being commonly named, since names are hurriedly clapped on things and persons, however ill perceived, which move as material units, whereas the most evident features in immediate experience receive no separate names, until perhaps some logician, poet, or madman grows conscious of their perpetual presence, and borrows some title for them from the vocabulary of physics, as I have borrowed this term essence, once used by chemists for their drugs, in order to designate every specious object actually present to intuition. Language is responsible not for these objects, but for the prejudice against them, and essence, if unnamed, is thought to be imperfect and but half real. An unchristian child has to be called so-and-so's baby, and a stranger in the street has to be pointed at dumbly. Yet it would be too egotistical, even for human nature, to assert that the waif or the stranger possessed no being of his own, but was essentially an abstraction from our social circle, because he could be described in our language only relatively and peripherally. It is not otherwise with the immediate, radical, nameless phantoms of feeling and intuition. They are just the appearances they are, exactly determinate and perfect at each moment, and different in some precise way from whatever else may be felt before or after or by other people, and the necessary defects, or rather the proper summary function of language or reflection, must not be charged against those primary appearances as a defect of essence. When a term is felt to be disparaging, as the term abstract has become for some writers, it can easily be passed on from one bad thing to another. Instead of designating defect of form, abstractness may designate defect of quantity. In an etymological sense, any part of a thing, like the skin of an apple when peeled off, might be called an abstraction from the whole, especially when the part abstracted happens not to have existed separately in the beginning, as do the bricks of a house, but to have grown up together with the whole, and been first found there. Hence a well-known doctrine that only the absolute is concrete and that every particular fact or observation is an abstraction. In this sense of the word, every essence would be an abstraction from the realm of essence, but no essence, much less the realm of essence in its entirety, would be an abstraction from existing things. On the contrary, existing things would be abstractions from their essences, which in the realm of essence possess much richer essential relations than those which in existing instances are abstracted and realized materially. The rind of the apple, peeled and curling casually on a plate, would be a miserable abstraction from all the spirals and all the patterns implied in its geometrical essence and in its pictorial aspect. Abstraction, however, in the proper sense of the word, is possible only for a mind. Things and essences, whatever may be their unions or separations, are never in their own being abstractions from anything else. A term can be abstract only relatively. How should anything be abstract in itself? None of the constituents of a thing or an essence is an abstraction from it. Each is a thing or an essence in its own right. To find abstractions, we must enter the psychological sphere and consider the causal history of human ideas. A late idea, though its object may be perfectly concrete and definite, like the sphere, may be simple in comparison with some early impression, say, that of an apple, which may have first suggested it. And if the variegated essence was really distinguished first, which is not always the case, and the simple one, roundness, was only noticed afterwards as an element included in the other, then for that person the sphere will be something abstract, not indeed in its essence, but in its mode of reaching manifestation. An act of abstraction happens first to have revealed this essence to this man, but such an approach is accidental. A true psychologist would often record that in looking at some roundish thing he first noticed and intuited nothing but roundness, perfect, platonic, and unadulterated. The clumsiest spheroid cannot convey to an innocent mind any idea save that of a simple sphere, and our first impression of a world in which everything is crooked is that everything is straight. The enormity of our childish idealism would prove immediately fatal if we needed to have a true idea of things in order to act properly in their presence. But ideas which are ridiculous as descriptions may be adequate as signals. All animals eat and breed without any notion of calories or eugenics. Hunger and love are moral overtones quite sufficient to express for them their share in the rude economy of nature. The mind is not a fifth wheel to her coach, but her observations on the journey. Conventional psychology is misled by a primitive Gnostic theory to the effect that things ought normally to appear to sense in their full and exact nature. Nothing could be further from the fact, or more incongruous with animal life and sensibility. That which appears to sense is determined at each moment by the liveliness and direction of the psyche in her current reactions. Things are thereby known in the sense that they are named, and distinguished by their rough aspect and occasions. They are not known at all in the sense of being disclosed in their inner nature, either totally or partially. The specious essence intuited is the name given by the psyche to the material force encountered or exerted. It is a spontaneous symbol, not abstract even in its origin, as the word cat is not drawn out of the domestic animal, yet serves to designate it in its entirety, and is much simpler. Repetition is impossible in the realm of essence. Two essences, if not difference, will be one essence. If different, they will be two essences, and not repetitions of the same essence. Repetition is possible only among objects which are particular but not individual. That is, when they exist and are distinguished by their external relations, even if internally they should happen to be precisely similar and should have but one individuality or essence. An individual may change his relations and have different moments and places of existence, so that here he may be surrounded by one environment and there by another. This possibility of iterating or repeating an essence is what, from the point of view of existence, makes essences seem abstract or general, when in reality they are the only individuals. An essence is not the thing which it defines, and may define many things numerically distinct. What is ordinarily called one thing or one person has many separable moments of existence, between any two of which it may perish. They will be moments of one thing or one person only in so far as one individual essence pervades those moments. As nothing can be abstract in itself, so nothing can be general in itself. Every essence is universal, not because there are repeated manifestations of it, for there need be no manifestations at all, but because it is individuated internally by its character, not externally by its position in the flux of nature. And no essence is general for the same reason. However it may be related to particular existences, its own nature is complete and intrinsic, whereas a term can be said to be general only if it happens to be predictable of a number of scattered things, none of which perhaps it defines intrinsically. Yet everything that is at all must be something intrinsically, had the term no individual essence. There would be no meaning in predicating it, and it could not be predicated of two things in the same sense, since it would have no sense. Before essences can be called, occasionally and in relation to natural things, either abstract or general, it is requisite that in themselves they should be concrete and individual. The organ of intuition is an animal psyche, governed by the laws of material life, in other words, by habit, so that it is normal for intuitions to be recurrent insofar as circumstances allow. Discourse in which intuitions subserve intent requires intended essences to recur identically, and imputes identity to them even when they are different, if their difference is irrelevant to the cogency of discourse and incompatible with it. It is these intended essences, identical for intent on various occasions but never actually intuited, that might well be called abstractions. They are like points of the compass, or limits of unending approaches. Ideal in the sense of being never realized, although clearly indicated and definable by their relation to other terms which are actually given. The identity of an essence with itself is absolute and constitutional, but the identity of the essence given in one intuition with that given in another is an identity assumed and always unverifiable. It is impossible to arrest the two intuitions and compare their objects. To do this would be to supersede both by a third in which perhaps twin objects were presented. But it would remain an assumption that one twin repeated the datum of one intuition and the other twin the datum of the other. Yet the impetuosity of life, which discourse cannot help sharing, brushes aside these scruples. Habit, iteration of words, gestures, and sentiments sufficiently identifies the essence meant at one moment with that meant at another, in contempt of the varying context in which they may appear. This essence, not the context, is probably the only object distinctly noticed or designated expressly. Thus, the essence of straightness is continually intuited afresh, and is absolutely identical at each recurrence. It is irrelevant that the material object evoking this essence may be different in each instance, and never quite straight. That context, even if vaguely pressing on the psyche, remains unsynthesized, unnoticed, and unintended. When on looking at a palm tree, a Roman road, or the horizon, I say to myself, how straight. I have exactly the same clear feeling, and this pure essence, not its irrelevant context, is what actually fills my mind, and if it were noticed in turn, would merely supply other essences of the same universality. It is impossible that anything should appear which is not universal, for it is definite and might evidently appear again. Hence the possibility of discourse. Its terms are coined into fixed values and can pass from mind to mind, retaining their original meaning. But mind is not a subject congenial to psychologists. They would like it either to reproduce material facts or to take its place among them, or even to swallow them up and be another name for them. Since the edges of material things are known to be broken and warped in fact, it is presumed that we must actually see all lines curved or broken. But mind is intrinsically and initially mind. It is poetical and Platonic from the beginning, and it is only by a painful eventual reinspection that it can correct its first impressions and allow that material things have in fact forms too complicated for the eye to trace, and a substance too remote in its pregnant texture from the scale of sense to be easily imagined, or to be imaginable by man at all. All this subterranean obscurity, however, is in its place. A wise man will not repine at it. Where clearness belongs, clearness enough may be found. The essences actually defined by attention are plain, brilliant, and homely, like the words of the vernacular. The psyche, applauding beast, needs but to fall into her old paces for the old visions to reappear. It is essences, not things, that are on the human scale. Not all essences, of course, but those which the mind evokes spontaneously. Whereas things, if humanized at all, can be humanized only by a long architectural labor, a labor which their insidious lapse very soon defeats and annuls. That essences, though universals, are individual and are given bodily in intuition, may be better understood if we consider those existing things which are supposed to be concrete in contrast to essences. Their existence, we shall find, depends on their external relations, on their inclusion in the flux of nature and science, in proportion as it penetrates to their dynamic structure and movement, becomes more and more mathematical, that is, operates with categories and terms more and more remote from pictorial physics. It is only when some portion of this inconceivably rapid and complicated flux of matter becomes recognizable and traceable in some respect that a somewhat concrete thing can be found to exist. In other words, the concreteness of things is borrowed from the presence in them and of some essence supposed to be abstract. Only when the flux, by its concentrations and sustained rhythms, manifests for a while locally some recognizable identity of form, can we speak of concretion in existence, that is, of a thing. Abandon that essence, and that thing has dissolved. Certainly this essence, if it is to qualify existence, must be manifested or embodied in some nexus of events, amid variable external relations. But the flux of events itself would be the most empty of unrealities if it still pretended to flow after having obliterated within itself all distinctions of quality, direction, or phase, that is, all self-identical essences. Essences are definite and thinkable. Existence is indefinite and only endured. That is the Platonic experience which I cannot help repeating and confirming at every turn. Only that by thinkable we must not understand definable in words, but open to intuition in the terms of any sense or of any logic. The flux flows by flowing through essences, and essences are manifested as the flux of matter or of attention picks them up and drops them. An essence, then, is no abstraction, no unrealizable generality, but an actual aspect which anything can wear, determining its nature, or revealing it to an attentive mind. The sweetness I may taste is not dependent in the order of knowledge or of being upon abstraction from anything else. In my experience, it is very likely the first indication I have of any substance called sugar existing near me, to be appropriated or investigated further. When I have gathered all I can learn about sugar, the sweetness originally tasted cannot become an abstraction from this much more remote and hypothetical object. It remains a self-sufficient essence, perhaps the only one given at the moment, but its appearance has now become, for my discursive thinking and belief, a symptom of certain chemical facts in the positive material world which I believe myself to inhabit. Objects, whether essences or facts, may be considered recurrently, on separate occasions and by separate minds. Otherwise, discourse and experience could have no sanity, and could accumulate knowledge on no subject. On each occasion, however, the intuition, sensation, or thought turned upon that object is a fresh event, not only numerically, but almost certainly by virtue of variations in its quality, context, and mental fringe, so that living in flux, unseizable, not recoverable, and never, even when it existed, brought under the unity of apperception. Experience is something that just because it exists, without rising to the authority of spirit, never exists all at once as a unit, but only by virtue of its parts, its movement, and its stress. Its parts exist, as it does itself, by occurring in a system of changes and conjunctions never given in such fleeting intuitions as it may include, and probably never given in intuition at all, even in the most accurate retrospect, because these moving clouds of sensibility and intent, the waking dreams of the psyche, are not objects which human attention is fitted or required to apprehend. They are complexes of no stability or importance as units. Nothing matters in them save the objects discerned by them, or discerned by us afterwards as the goals of their movement. In discerning any of these objects, whether they be essences or things, animal life becomes intuition, the synthesis of attention by which an essence appears, but this intellectual act is wholly focused on its object and unified only there. Taken as tension or potential perception, sensibility is diffused through indefinite time and through many vital functions. It would never exist actually and become a sensation unless it became the sensation of something, the intuition of some essence, like a pain or a sound. An essence is, then, not at all a mental state, a sensation, perception, or living thought. It is not an idea, as this word is understood in British philosophy. It is an idea only in the Platonic or graphic sense of being a theme open to consideration. Mental facts are not units either in nature or in logic. They are subdivisions made by literary psychologists in the flux of experience, considered romantically, as a biography abstracted from its organs and from its natural setting. The dream of life exists. It is going on perpetually in each of us, but its parts, called feelings and thoughts, are individuated only by the essences they discern, which are not the essences of those feelings or thoughts taken existentially as moments in a dream, but are the essences of anything and everything under heaven or over it. If I think of God, the essence, before me, my passing notion of the divine nature individuates that thought of mine and makes it possible for discourse afterwards to attribute it to me. But my thought was not God as it conceived God, it was a wretched mixture of words, memories, and dialectical gropings in my heated brain. So far is an existing idea from being the essence which it conceives. If a romantic psychologist ever succeeded in reconstructing a moment of mental life exactly as it existed, he would be reconstructing, in the fresh setting of his own thoughts, an event itself perfectly particular and never destined to recur. But evidently, since his reconstruction is accurate, the essence given in that past moment is given again to him now, and it must recur in so far as any historian afterwards conceives that experience truly. Repetition of events is impossible. The recovery of essences is easy. Many a dead man, for instance, has considered the dyad in the form of twins, 2 shillings, or the numeral 2, and twins, 2 shillings, and the numeral 2 are still found in the world. This dyad, though I give it a learned name, is indeed the burden of a primitive intuition. The cat has it when she misses one of her 2 kittens, and the foreigner conveys it by holding up 2 fingers. It is not the fingers or the absent kitten that then absorb attention, but the instantly felt difference between 1 and 2. In the midst of various vague and unsteady fields of experience, quick intuition continually recovers this important primary essence. Hugging it, the mind can fly from world to world and can make something definite and concrete out of their chaos, insofar as the dyad finds application there. Animals live huddled among things and necessarily watchful of them, except in those hours of stolid composure in which they seem to be contemptuously availing themselves of the chance not to think. Whenever they think, however, whether in dreams or in action, they can think only in terms of essences, and hence that fundamental illusion, that hypostasis of given essences, which the philosopher should regard as normal and amiable, while avoiding it in his own person as far as possible. He will succeed in this self-discipline in proportion as his interests are intellectual and set on essences rather than on things. He will then feel the sharp contrast between the clear hypothetical pictures in his thoughts and the dark complexities of nature. He will be constantly aware of being an impressionist in physics, a dramatist in psychology, a novelist in history, and a pure dialectician in mathematics. But other philosophers are not lacking to defend the illusion which animal faith imposes on everybody until criticism comes to distinguish the sphere of action from the language in which imagination expresses its adventures there. When intuition remains closely attached to urgent action, in hunting, for instance, or in pain, the essences appearing seem actually to inhabit the material object or the bodily member into which perception projects them. Given essences then seem to be constituents of substances, even when they are descriptive of perfectly immaterial facts, like intentions and feelings. Such sentiments, as imagined by the observer, are boldly attributed to other people and thought of as agencies at work within them. This dramatic sort of hypostasis is, after all, the most defensible, because if the observer and the observed are similar creatures in similar circumstances, they will really be having similar intuitions, so that our wild shot will hit the bullseye by a pre-established harmony. The transcript of nature in discourse will, of course, remain poetical, since a man's sentiments are but unrhymed poems which nature improvises within him. But one poet may truly understand and repeat another. It is harder to conceive how the form of a hollow sphere and the color blue can help to compose the substance of aerial space, or where exactly they shall be deputed to lodge. Nor is it clear how these essences can occupy some nearer locus, such as a nerve or a brain. It will not help to call these appearances qualities of things, rather than parts, if the qualities are supposed to be intrinsic. The intrinsic qualities of a thing compose its essence, and its essence, when caught in external relations, is the thing itself. If, on the contrary, by calling appearances qualities rather than parts of things, it be meant that these qualities are adventitious and relative, the contention is valid, because any aspect, effect, or relation occurring to a thing justifies a new epithet being assigned to it, as on my birth a whole series of dead men up to Adam suddenly became my ancestors. So when a human eye is turned skyward, the sky truly acquires the quality of looking blue and round. Those are its real qualities in relation to such an observer, as certain substances are truly poison for rats. These ulterior questions, however, cannot arrest the impetuous dogmatic instinct which asserts things to be what they seem and to exist in the very terms in which they appear. The stones would laugh if they got wind of this human assurance, but meantime it is not useless in developing human acquaintance with essences, because this incongruous dignity attributed to them of being material things has the merit of attaching practical minds to them, and later, if these wise men discover their error, they may have acquired the habit of defining essences, and may find them worth cleaving to for their own sake.